Today on Capechi's Corner, we're going to look at solving quadratic equations using square roots. Okay, so let's look at some examples here. So when I have a square of a variable like x squared, or I have another variable in there as well, we need to do inverse operations to get that x by itself. So in this case, I get x squared is equal to 12. I need to take the square root of both sides, but I have to remember about that plus or minus there, which we're going to go over in just a minute. Same thing if it's a little more advanced. We need to get that 6 to the other side, so we'll do our opposite operation, and then we'll get x squared is equal to 8. We'll take the square root of both sides, and then we'll simplify it again. We can't forget about that plus or minus. Okay, let's take a look at some problems. So here we go. Here's our wall. Once that x squared or y squared, whatever the variable is by itself, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Okay, because x squared, and when I take the square root of x, that gives me x to the first. Okay, so it gives me x equals. Now here's the important part that it's very easy to forget. You need that plus or minus in front. Square root of 144 is 12. So that's going to be our answer. And what that means is x is equal to positive 12 or x is equal to negative 12. The reason we have to do both is because if I were to square it, right, 12 squared is 144, but also negative 12 squared is negative 12 times negative 12, which is also 144. So that's the reason why we need that plus or minus. All right, looking at the next problem, I have a wall. I do have that x squared by itself. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. But here's the thing. I cannot take the square root of negative 169 when I'm talking just about real numbers. When we get to Algebra 2, we'll talk about imaginary numbers. But as of right now in Algebra 1, we can't do that. So we're just going to say no real solution. And the reason why we can't have a real number that will work, because look at these examples here. If I take 13 times 13, that gives me positive 169. I'm looking for something that when I multiply, I get negative 69. Negative 169. What if I take negative 13 times negative 13? That's also positive 169. So again, nothing is going to give me negative 169 when I multiply it by itself. Okay, let's take a look at our next set of problems. Here's my wall. I don't have x squared by itself yet, so I'm going to have to divide both sides by negative 2, and I'm left with x squared, and then 96 divided by 2 will give me 48. Okay, negative 96 divided by negative 2 gives me positive 48. Take the square root of both sides. So I have x is equal to plus or minus. Now, 48 is not a perfect square. The highest perfect square that goes into 48 is 16. So I'm going to take the square root of 16 times the square root of 3. So that gives me x is equal to plus or minus. The square root of 16 is 4. So I have plus or minus 4 root 3. Okay, let's keep going. Again, here's my wall. I'm going to multiply both sides by negative 2, and that will get rid of this negative 1/2. So that gives me x squared is equal to positive 72. Take the square root of both sides, and x is equal to plus or minus. Highest perfect square is 36. So I have 36 and 2. So my answer is, again, x is equal to plus or minus 6 root 2. All right, let's keep going. We're going to keep kind of building on what we've been doing. So the next one, again, here's my wall. I'm going to take, I need to get the x squared by itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take that 17, I'm going to subtract it, get to the other side, and I have 3x squared is equal to positive 192. Divide both sides by 3, and I have x squared is equal to 64. Take the square root of both sides. 64 is a perfect square, so I'm going to get x is equal to plus or minus 8. Look at another one. Here's my wall. Again, I don't have my x squared by itself, so I'm going to add 20 to both sides. And I have negative 7x squared is equal to 63. Divide both sides by negative 7, and I have x squared is equal to negative 9. Now from here, I can notice I can either stop here or I could keep going. And I realize that if I take the square root of both sides, I would get a negative number in there, which I can't have. So again, here, the answer is going to be no real solution. Can't take a square root of a negative number. Okay, let's take a look at our next problem. We're talking about the formula for the volume of a cylinder, which is pi r squared h. And it's asking what's the radius. So that radius is our R value. That's what I'm looking for. When they tell you that the volume is 500 pi meters cubed and the height is 12 meters. So anytime I have a formula, I'm just going to look at the formula. I'm going to plug in what I know. So I know the volume is 500 pi. So I substitute that in. And then I have pi. Remember, R is what I'm trying to find. So that R squared stays there. And the height they give us is 12. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to divide both sides by 12. And that gives me 125 over 3. And then I still have pi on both sides, R squared. So I can either, when I have pi on both sides, I can either just cross them off one of each side, or what I'm technically doing is I'm just dividing both sides by pi. So then I'm left with 125 over 3 is equal to R squared. Okay, so I'm going to take the square root of both sides. It's a little bit more advanced because of the fact that it's a fraction. 125 gets broken into 25 and 5, and I have root 3 on the bottom. So that gives me 5 root 5 all over root 3. Now I can't have a square root on the bottom, so I'm going to multiply top and bottom by root 3. And that gives me 5 root 15 all over 3. Okay, now technically that's what the radius is. Technically it is plus or minus, because whenever I take the square root of a square, it's plus or minus. But in this particular case, because it's a word problem, I'm looking for distance. So I'm going to erase that plus or minus. I can't have that. The radius is a distance, something I can measure. So it has to be a positive value. So the radius is 5 root 15 all over 3. Okay. Let's take a look at our last one. It says an object is dropped from a height, h in feet, at time stands for t, and is given by the following equation. So they give us an equation, okay? How long is t, right? That's what I'm trying to find, t, will it take for the ball to reach the ground? So the height, right? The height, if it hits the ground, is 0. It's 0 inches off the ground, or 0 meters off the ground, or 0 feet off the ground. It's 0. So I'm trying to decide what t is. How long is that going to take to happen? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add 20t squared to both sides. Basically, just kind of bring that to the left. So I have 20t squared is equal to 320. Divide both sides by 20, and t squared is equal to 16. And take the square root of both sides. Now remember, this would technically be t is equal to plus or minus 4. But I'm talking about how long. I'm talking about seconds. I don't have negative seconds. So in this case, it's just going to be positive 4. So my final answer is going to be 4 seconds. That's how long it's going to take to hit the ground. Okay? Thanks so much for stopping by today. You have a great day.